The average Christian would firmly deny the existence of deities other than the God of the Bible. While lesser spiritual entities such as angels and demons are real, figures from long-dead religions like Zeus, Thor, and Ra, or the pantheons of modern religions like Hinduism, simply do not exist. They are imaginary. But as we will see, this view is too simplistic to capture what the Bible really communicates about the inhabitants of the divine realm. It may surprise many Christians to learn that God is often directly compared to other deities in Scripture. For you, Lord, are the most high over all the earth. You are exalted far above all gods. Who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders? Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you, in heaven above or on earth below, you who keep your covenant of love with your servants, who continue wholeheartedly in your way. These are only a handful of passages that praise Yahweh by showing His superiority to other gods. The question Christians must wrestle with is, how do statements like this make sense if these other gods do not really exist? Think of how it would sound if someone tried to exalt Jesus by comparing Him to an imaginary creature. It would not only be offensive to say, Jesus is better than a leprechaun, it would be illogical. The same is true for the comparisons between God and other deities in the Old Testament. The ancient authors are not comparing God to imaginary beings. In order for these exaltations to be logical and non-blasphemous to ancient Israelites, the gods which Yahweh is compared to must be real. What about passages which seemingly deny the existence of other gods? Isn't this proof that other gods are simply fictional? I am the Lord, and there is no other. Apart from me there is no God. Wherefore thou art great, O Lord God, for there is none like thee, neither is there any God beside thee, according to all that we have heard with our ears. You were shown these things so that you might know that the Lord is God. Besides Him there is no other. If these passages are taken literally, there is a contradiction between them and the exaltations mentioned earlier. But there need be no contradiction, if one accepts that the authors are describing the incomparability of the God of Israel, not claiming the other gods aren't real. Saying, there is no God other than the God of Israel, is akin to someone from Green Bay boasting that there is no football team other than the Packers. This becomes very clear when statements of incomparability are applied to things other than God. The 47th chapter of Isaiah is a judgment against Babylon. In verse 8, the author puts words in the condemned city's mouth. Now therefore hear this, you lover of pleasures, who sit securely, who say in your heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. I shall not sit as a widow or know the loss of children. The same thing happens with the city of Nineveh in the book of Zephaniah. This is the city of revelry that lived in safety. She said to herself, I am the one, and there is none besides me. Obviously, Babylon and Nineveh were not the only cities on earth. Like passages which say there is no other God, these are not statements of denial. They are boasts of incomparability. One of the most well-known stories from the Bible is the Israelites' escape from Egypt. While it is easy to view this story as a confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh, the real conflict is between Yahweh and the Egyptian pantheon. On the eve of the first Passover, before the final plague, God Himself declares, On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals. and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. This statement, which comes from God's own mouth, makes no sense if the gods of Egypt were not real. It dishonors God to think he would boast about passing judgment on imaginary beings. What about idols? If other gods are real, then why does the Bible claim the statues used by pagans are nothing more than inanimate physical objects? And there you shall serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. One must understand that ancient people made a distinction between the physical idols and the spirits which dwelt inside them. As I explained in my book, The Unseen Realm, ancient idol worshippers believed the objects they made were inhabited by gods. This is why they performed ceremonies to open the mouth of the statue. The mouth had to be ritually opened so the spirit of the deity could move in. This process localized the god to a specific geographic area. While the authors of the Bible poked fun at the statues idolaters used, they did not deny the existence of the spirits inside the idols. We can see this distinction at work in 1 Corinthians. Do I mean then that food sacrificed to an idol is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, but the sacrifices of pagans are offered to demons, not to God, and I do not want you to be participants with demons. Paul is saying that the sacrifice and the idol are inconsequential, but the demon linked to the idol is not something Christians should be associated with. Paul is quoting the Old Testament here. In Deuteronomy 32:17, Moses accused the Israelites of worshiping demons who were not God, gods they had never known. Many Christians are willing to acknowledge the existence of other spiritual entities apart from Yahweh, but they are not comfortable using the English word God with a lowercase g to describe them. They would prefer to call these other entities demons. While this isn't precisely correct, whatever term we use, it is clear the Bible describes real spiritual entities who have power on earth and accept the worship of humans. To the authors of the Bible, these gods were not imaginary. So, does this mean the Bible is polytheistic? Not in any way. The Bible is very consistent in the way it exalts the God of Israel over other deities. While other spiritual players exist, Yahweh is never said to be equal to them. Yahweh does not want or need an idol to inhabit. He cannot be captured and localized through ritual. Only Yahweh is described in the Bible as all-powerful, all-knowing, and self-existent. According to the Bible, only Yahweh, the God of Israel, is worthy of worship. And only Yahweh is the creator of all things in heaven and earth, the spiritual and terrestrial realms. The Bible never says these things about other gods. What we see in the Bible is a hierarchy of spiritual beings with God at the top. This hierarchy is much more complicated than simple ideas about angels and demons. It will be explored in the next video in this series. In the previous video, we learned that, contrary to popular belief, the Bible actually affirms the existence of other gods. However, we should not consider the Bible's authors polytheists, since Scripture exalts the God of Israel far above other divine beings. In this video, we will explore the role lesser divine beings played in the Old Testament. In Psalm 82, the God of Israel, the God of the Bible, is said to hold judgment over other gods. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. Psalm 82 becomes very interesting if you learn a little Hebrew. The word most often translated God or gods in the Old Testament is Elohim. Watch what happens when we reveal where that word is used in this passage. Notice that both the capital G, God, and the lowercase g, gods, were changed. That is because the word Elohim can be used for several different things. The context of the passage tells us what Elohim is referring to. The Bible's writers use Elohim as an alternate name for Yahweh over 1,000 times, but Elohim can also refer to the gods of foreign nations, or demons, spirits of the human dead, and angels, most likely the angel of the Lord. As you can see, these are all inhabitants of the spiritual realm. It should be clear from this list that not all Elohim were considered equal. While Yahweh is an Elohim, the writers of the Bible considered him unique and far above the others. The ancient Israelites thought of the spiritual world as a three-tiered hierarchy with God at the top. It may surprise many Christians to learn that angels are actually on the lowest tier of the hierarchy. The Hebrew word for angel, malach, is basically a job description used to denote a spirit being who carries out modest tasks, like delivering messages. The tier above the angels is occupied by beings called B'nai Elohim in Hebrew. B'nai Elohim is usually translated sons of God in English Bibles, and when most people read that phrase, they are not even aware it refers to spiritual beings. But as we will see, the sons of God played an important role in the Old Testament. In the beginning of the book of Job, there is a meeting of God's court or council. Guess who is there? Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, a term that means adversary, also came among them. The sons of God do not only show up in God's throne room. Later, in Job, we see that the sons of God were present at creation. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. We can see that the sons of God were important figures. In the Old Testament, they are often associated with God's inner circle. That inner circle has a name. Scholars call it the Divine Council, which comes from Psalm 82, verse 1. It is the collection of spiritual beings through which God chooses to administer his rule. All ancient Mediterranean religions had some concept of a divine council, and the Israelites were no different. In the 22nd chapter of 1 Kings, the prophet Micaiah describes a meeting of the divine council. In this scene, God decides that Ahab needs to be dealt with. And Micaiah said, "Therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, Who will entice Ahab, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing, and another said another." Notice that God does not deal with Ahab directly. He lets his council decide who should go. After much deliberation, God deems one of the council members worthy. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, "I will entice him." And the Lord said to him, "By what means?" And he said, "I will go out, and will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets." And he said, "You are to entice him, and you shall succeed. Go out and do so." God then commands the spirit to carry out the plan and foretells its success. Scenes like this from God's throne room are very interesting, but probably the most illuminating passage about the divine council and the sons of God is the passage we started with. In Psalm 82, we learn that some of the council members are under judgment because they have acted wickedly. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, You are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die, and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. As we can see, the gods under judgment in this passage are not just any Elohim. They are the B'nai Elyon, the sons of the Most High, or the sons of God in other passages, members of Yahweh's inner circle. If this is the first time you've really taken a close look at Psalm 82, you probably have 100 questions. But it is impossible to touch on every subject concerning the ancient Israelites' view of the spiritual realm in a short video like this. In-depth information on these topics can be found in my book, The Unseen Realm. Or you can visit one of my websites, drmsh.com or thedivinecouncil.com. Or you can watch my Divine Council 101 video series on YouTube. Ancient people believed that chaos was the primeval state of the universe. Much like a big pile of Lego bricks scattered across your living room, the building blocks for creation were in place, but they remained unformed until some deity came along and imposed order. In ancient writings, chaos was often symbolized by the raging sea, and we can find that imagery in the very first verses of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. When you start to recognize chaos imagery, it casts new light on familiar Bible stories. Think of the story of Noah's Ark, where God turns the world into a raging sea. This judgment wasn't simply a big flood. It was God allowing the watery forces of chaos to overwhelm the earth. Going forward in the Old Testament, we come to the story of the Exodus. The climax of the Hebrews' escape involves Moses dividing a sea into two halves. This miracle points back to Genesis and creates a parallel between the creation of the world and the birth of the new nation of Israel. But the sea wasn't the only symbol used for chaos. Primordial chaos was often personified in the form of sea monsters. One such monster is the Babylonian goddess Tiamat. In the Babylonian version of creation, Tiamat fights with the god Marduk. After a detailed battle, Marduk kills Tiamat and cuts her body in two. He then uses the divided pieces to form the heavens and the earth. Something very similar happens in Genesis. And God said, Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. These waters are apparently the deep mentioned in Genesis 1:2. The Hebrew word translated deep is tehom, which some scholars argue is closely akin to Babylonian Tiamat. This isn't the only place foreign sea monsters show up in the Bible in a creation context. Psalm 74 describes God creating the world, but in the middle of the description we find this: You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters on the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. Yours is the day. Yours also the night. You have established the heavenly lights and the sun. This passage has God destroying sea monsters by dividing the chaotic waters. In this case, scholars know the imagery comes from the literature of ancient Ugarit, where the god Baal battles Yam, who is portrayed as a chaotic churning sea, and a terrifying sea dragon named Tanun or Litanu. These terms are equivalent to the Hebrew words in the psalm. You divided the sea, Yam, by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters, Taninim, on the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan, Leuyatan. So what in the world is going on here? God didn't really fight literal sea monsters at the beginning of creation. The Bible's authors are purposely taking competing religious views and turning them around. The writers want everyone to know that Yahweh, the God of Israel, defeated chaos, not Marduk or Baal or any other deity. Yahweh is the one who sets order to the universe and holds chaos at bay. Ultimately, it is Yahweh who will create a new world without chaos. Look how Revelation describes eternity. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. This verse is not depicting a world without large bodies of water. The message is that chaos and all that opposes God will be defeated once and for all. For more information on these topics and many others, visit drmsh.com or thedivinecouncil.com.